Welcome everyone to today's forum. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley also provides an array of transformative experiences such as internships, forums, and classes. The Hinckley forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. And now I will pass it on.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Hinckley Forum. My name is Benjamin Lozada, and I'm a student ambassador for both the Hinckley Institute of Politics and the University of Utah Economics Department. Today's forum is titled Preparing for a Brilliant Future of Renewable Energy in Utah and is presented in partnership with the University of Utah Economics Department ambassadors. We are excited to be joined by some great panelists. Dr. Steve Bannister is an associate professor in the Department of Economics and currently serves as the director and chair of the Masters of Science in International Affairs and Global Enterprise program here at the university. After military service, including service in Thailand, his business career included stints with Fortune 500 firms, mid-sized manufacturing firms, international management consulting, and 4 technology and medical startups. Professor Bannister is a self-described macroeconometrician interested in both the historical and empirical role of energy consumption in economic development and growth. Lisa Romney is the Economic Development and Regional Business Manager for Rocky Mountain Power. Lisa works directly with commercial and industrial customers and municipal governments to assist in the areas where business and the energy sector intersect. She has been professionally engaged in energy for more than 2 decades, as a business manager for Chevron Energy Solutions and the environmental advisor to former Salt Lake City Mayor Rocky Anderson. Lisa has a master's degree from the Harvard Graduate School of Design and a BS in environmental science from Utah State University. Thom Carter, Governor Spencer Cox's energy advisor and the executive director of the government's Office for Economic Development, was unfortunately unable to make it today as he had a last-minute conflict. Today's panel will be moderated by Anna Lee. Anna is one of my fellow economics ambassadors and is currently a senior graduating this May with a degree in economics and a minor in environment and sustainability studies. She previously interned for Governor Spencer Cox, and her goal in the future is to turn environmental sustainability into economic profitability. Please join me in welcoming all of our guests.
Okay, well, without further ado, let's get started. Can you please define and explain the differences between renewable and clean energy?
Go ahead.
Do you want to take that? That's an interesting question. Wasn't necessarily sure that strict definitions had been applied at this point. When I think of it in my position from the power company, renewable is not fossil fuel based, and limits, maybe, anyway, leave it at that. Clean energy is sort of interesting. We have a lot of hydro. It could be considered clean. It's not fossil fuel based, but certainly has its own impact on the environment and challenges when we hit drought years, et cetera. So I don't know if I can come up with a real specific definition, but
I think that would be very close to mine.
Okay.
So, however, one slight modification, technically, renewables could include all biomass, wood and so forth, which is carbon-based. So when you burn that, it's not clean, right? So that's the only distinction I would make. I think the rest of it is fine. Okay. Does it put out, are you burning carbon? Are you combusting carbon is the distinction.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, as you mentioned, drought-wise, happening in Lake Powell right now with hydroelectric power, there's a drought, and so they're suffering with producing enough energy to power the towns there. So that's the problem with that. How much energy in Utah is currently being produced through alternative sources? Is the majority fossil fuel based?
so I'm going to take this one.
You bet.
As the major power provider in the state of Utah, I can speak to our resource mix. And I've been in Utah working in this realm since the early 2000s. And if you asked Rocky Mountain Power back then what the resource mix was, the answer was still 98% coal. Like, it was very coal-based. Since that time, fast forward to 2021, and our thermal mix, which is natural gas, coal, those traditional resources, as 56%. 25% wind, let's see, 11% solar, 8% hydroelectric. So we are getting a much more balanced mix of resources already.
Interesting.
Could I
Yeah.
just, that's great. I think I looked at the EIA, so the Department of Energy data for 2020, not quite as up to date as yours, Lisa, but, and for Utah, they had essentially 86% as carbon-based between coal and natural gas. And the rest, so the 14% was renewables. So you're better off than the EIA numbers for the state.
And our numbers come from our integrated resource plan,
Right.
which is a document that
Right.
we update every 2 years, where all of our resources compete against each other on cost, which is an interesting thing for economics people, right? That all of those factors get plugged into huge models and really tell us where to go get our resources. And those models historically used to always say, you know, stick with those affordable thermal options, and now the clean renewable energy is much more competitive, and that's why you're seeing the shift in resources.
I do have one extension to that, though. I mean, Rocky Mountain Power is in the business of producing electricity, and that's what the numbers I related and the numbers I believe you related. But that's not the only source of our greenhouse gas emissions, including carbon dioxide, right, that cause both our local inversion and global warming. And I think in Utah, transport is a major sector contributing to the problems. And I think the energy or the emissions from that sector that are damaging, I think are on the order of 30% of the total emissions. So these numbers we just shared probably overstate the impact of renewables on everything that's going on in Utah, none of which you're, well, in a sense you are, because of electric transport, but that's a separate, sort of a separate thing. You don't control that.
We got lots more questions. I think we'll hit a
Yeah,
couple more
sorry,
things.
Okay.
So
sorry.
yeah.
Energy diversity is key to Utah's future. What are the most promising types of clean and renewable energy sources that we could be implementing right now for the future?
Well, I fully, completely support every way I can conceive of the current fleet of renewables. So that would be mainly wind, solar, and geothermal, and hydro in southern Utah especially. I think, well, that's essentially what I support all of that. Now, I'm gonna modify this because I don't know when the question is gonna come up, but I will put in the caveat that my research shows that, and this is not a Utah problem, specific problem at all, this is a global problem, that the path we are on, considering all renewables, is not going to solve our big problems, either here in Utah, frankly, or globally. And therefore, the current fleet of renewables, the ones I mentioned, are not going to be sufficient. And I've got, I don't know, do you want me to show the graph now?
Yeah.
So for example, one output of my research, I did bring one graph. It's getting cut off at the top. That's, there we go. This is actually my research applied to Utah. So one of the things that comes out of my research is a forecast of the carbon dioxide emissions from essentially all power energy inputs. And this shows it, I can't read that, so let me pull out my version of it. This shows essentially the problem, I don't know if I have it. There it is. Which we're going to about increase from roughly now by about 25 or 30% by 2065, which is as far as my model forecasts out into the future. And that's not going in the right direction, right? We need to be decreasing all of this. And again, I want to emphasize it's not a Utah problem. I think we can do things here in Utah to help our local problems, but we're not on the right path to fix the big problem. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Well,
So we need new technology.
right. Judging by your research, if switching to renewable and clean energy sources isn't going to be enough, what do you think could actually help
Well,
solve
I
the
was
problem?
afraid someone would ask me that question.
You gotta ask the hard questions.
Well, it's not hard, it's just, Marshall knows the story. I'm going to be very careful what I say because I don't want to open up, totally deflect this entire seminar, which has other important questions. But in physics, both theoretical and applied, there are solutions that are far more capable of solving the entire problem. These are not quite yet commercialized solutions, but they are feasible. People are working on them. People are working on commercializing them. And that's what I spend a good chunk of my time trying to support. So trying to get those people aware of those and make sure that we fund the research necessary to get those done very quickly. And if we do that, we can clean the environment fairly rapidly, I mean, frankly. So it's pretty amazing. We can stop global warming in a matter of a few years if you get rid of carbon.
Wow, okay.
So, yeah.
And I think that, and I want to add to that a little bit as well, but I think that's why the research institutions are so important, right? Because you go with what can we continue to develop, what can we continue to push, while the businesses that are providing power and making things work, like Rocky Mountain Power is one of the first central utility systems in the nation. We've been doing this for 110 plus years at this point, and everything you see is really built on our ability to push electrons down wire in an exposed environment, right? It's been an incredible industry to be a part of and watch society bloom around it. But for renewables in the near term, there's wind and solar. They are not enough on their own because they don't provide the reliability that a grid needs to push electrons down wire in an exposed environment, right? And I work directly with our customers. I know the emotional, financial, everything impact of someone being out of power, whether it's an elementary school where they have to send kids home and every parent has to come out of the office to come take care of them, or whether it's someone who makes carbon fiber and we just shut down $1 million worth of their material. So there's huge impacts when the reliability isn't there. So wind and solar isn't enough. So we're already looking at large-scale battery backup. But everything has its challenges and limitations. So that's there. This is not a plug. It's a very reasonable place to get information, not officially sanctioned by Rocky Mountain Power, but it's where I got a lot of good information. But how many people here have seen Inside Bill's Brain on Netflix? Nobody. So it is a 3-part documentary series, and the last episode is on clean energy, where Bill Gates wants to solve this problem. And so he looks at nuclear power and what the risks and issues have been, huge issues for humanity, I believe, and wants to address those through technology. And so right now we do have, so that's kind of the basis of the technology, if you want to go look it up, but we have a demonstration project on nuclear that we are trying to get in the ground in Wyoming, which would provide baseload clean energy.
Okay.
So all of those pieces are there. Technology needs to continue to develop. Reliability as a power company is our focus, and we're utilizing everything we can at this point.
Right. Well, that leads perfectly to my next question. One type of energy production Utah does currently not use is nuclear power. What are the potentials and limitations of nuclear power, specifically in Utah?
The ones I quote are cost. So nuclear has been significantly more expensive and getting more so through time. And really, in a sense, from an economic standpoint, the entire problem in not having more renewables already, in operation, is not enough of a cost differential. They're getting competitive, but they're not as competitive as we need to be to get rid of carbon sources. I mean, so the sort of future technology that I alluded to promises electricity, power, up to 600 times cheaper than anything we have right now. I think that would get RMP's attention.
We'd be there. We'd plug it into the IRP and We'd go get it.
And then carbon would be gone pretty much, in the blink of an eye, a decade or so. And that would be a huge win if we can get there quickly. Yep.
Well, Lisa, Rocky Mountain Power is the provider for Utah's energy needs. What are the primary sources for electric power in our homes?
So different from what I read previously in terms of the resource mix?
Yes.
So I mean, it's an interesting question, Utah versus Pacific Corp, right? Rocky Mountain Power is the person you pay your power bill to, the company you pay your power bill to. It doesn't come to me, much to my chagrin. But PacifiCorp is actually the generation and large-scale transmission company. And that grid, there's a question later about how dependent is Utah on other states. Well, we don't view it as a dependency. We see it as a partnership. The transmission system spans multiple states. There's an energy imbalance market, which every 5 minutes we're balancing the most affordable energy in our entire Western grid, right? Separate from Texas. And people saw the pitfalls of islanding yourself off when those storms hit in Texas. So our resource mix, there are still that 50%, 56%, is that what I said, of thermal resources that aren't necessarily all generated here in Utah. House Bill 411, people who weren't involved in that process saw it as an air quality issue. And even the municipal leaders of that process were very clear to say this is not a local air quality issue. This is a larger regional issue because power isn't all produced right here in Salt Lake City. Some of it's in Wyoming, some of it's in Oregon, some of it's in Utah. And so it's coming from all the sources, but we're pushing electrons down wire in an exposed environment.
Okay, well, what do you think the future of energy production and use will look like over the next 10 years in Utah?
Well, you know
you
what
want
the
to take-
IRP
yeah.
says. So.
Yeah, I mean, so something that is important in terms of what we are seeing in our IRP and this shift away from thermal resources, traditional resources, is it looks like we'd have a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2020. That appears to have been met. A 74% reduction by 2030, and a 98% reduction by 2050. So as we add more and more renewables into our mix, those greenhouse gas emissions continue to go down. And like I've said, it's not all going to be done on wind and solar. We've got to start coupling the technologies, pushing the technologies, making nuclear safe, all of those things to move forward.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of looking out further into non-commercial sources at this point, and trying to make sure people are aware of them and trying to get them funded. If to the degree that's successful, and I have hope, then things could happen very quickly within a decade, as I alluded to. I mean, the promise of this energy is in this cost differential. I mean, if you want to think about very roughly, right now, renewables versus carbon sources are, 1-to-1 or close, right? They're sort of competitive, and renewables are coming down a bit, but they don't have a steep cost descent curve. But a 600 time that I alluded to, cost differential, changes the game, I think, for anybody that's in the power business, anybody. So that's what I focus on. If you ask me a probability of it's going to happen, well, I think there's a good probability. Better than 50% it'll happen within 10 years. If it'll happen in the next 5, I'm not sure. There are a lot of moving parts here, and a lot of people that would be hurt. I mean, there would be a lot of disruptions if that level of technological change takes place, which is why social scientists, frankly, such as me, in our college, have to be involved in what the future is, to begin to think about how do you fix all of the disruptions that are going to happen in the culture and in the global economy and the Utah economy. I mean, we have communities right here who, as coal continues to decline in use, and it's going to continue to decline here in Utah as well, then we have communities that are going to be, whose jobs are going to get lost to coal production. And it's a job of government, both local or state and federal, to come up with ways to fix those problems, to compensate those people, to make sure they're not overly harmed. And that's the job of social science, to help think through those future issues. And if we get there in 10 years, it's going to be, we got to think pretty quickly.
Right. Well, do you personally think, this is kind of a side note, that renewable energy, the industry, could be as profitable as fossil fuel industry is
Sure.
in the future? You do? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what is a
But-
policy?
but
Go ahead.
That doesn't mean their costs are going to be sufficient
Right.
to rapidly banish carbon fuels from the scene. Yeah.
It'll take time.
Right.
Well, what is a policy you would hope would be implemented to positively affect the development of clean energy in Utah?
Well, okay. First of all, I would eliminate, if I were, king for a day or whatever, I would eliminate any subsidies. This is both state and local and federal, to carbon sources. Just wipe them out. Get rid of them. Right. Totally disincentivize them. They get a lot of subsidies right now. I would further fully subsidize the fleet of renewables that we've got in place to try to make sure that they continue to be at least competitive in cost with the carbon sources. And I would fund the research into the kind of technologies, the advanced ones that I alluded to. And I didn't really finish my thought or the question on nuclear. I think it's always going to have a cost problem compared to what we have right now and what I think about the future. And there's also the safety issue, right? The proliferation issue, which is something in my other day job in the public affairs program, international public affairs. We study the proliferation issue, and that's an ongoing worry. So. Not solved yet.
Right.
From Rocky Mountain Power's standpoint, we absolutely support ongoing and even expanding the production tax credits, the investment tax credits, to help, we don't like the term subsidize, right? But to help support the development of renewables. We would love to see a standalone tax credit for battery systems as well, to help the reliability of the current renewables. And a transmission investment tax credit would be a great add, because we can't build everything we need exactly where we need it. Sometimes things are going to be built remotely, and we need the transmission to get it to where it's used.
Right.
So.
And you kind of touched base on this earlier, but how dependent is Utah and other states and countries for its energy needs?
Yeah, not terribly. We're very much in a partnership in our western grid.
Okay.
Pacific Corp holds its own generation. It's been interesting that Utah has benefited tremendously financially in terms of the cost per kWh just by the overdevelopment of solar in California. Right? There are times when California is producing so much solar that they've just got to dump it. So we pick that up. Changes, adds renewables to us. We get it at a very affordable rate. There's no impact to our customers, which we are a regulated utility. And we are regulated to provide a reasonable cost of power so that everyone has access to it. Power isn't something that people should have to go without.
Right.
So access is very important.
Right.
And affordability.
Meaning we saw that in Texas for, what was it, 100 days they went without power. It was a tragedy. How much does the production and use of fossil fuels currently contribute to Utah's economy?
You may have exact numbers. I do not. I do think it's important that Rocky Mountain Power is focused on a just transition.
Right.
We have future coal retirements planned. We've already retired coal plants in the state. And right now, those have been part of Utah's healthy economy for a long time. So we're very focused on that just transition.
Definitely.
I did pull some numbers from, I believe, Bureau of Labor Statistics, specifically for Utah, on jobs or employment. Let's see, they've broken it down by coal industry, oil and other petroleum, and natural gas, and everything else is, vanishingly small. And if I can add this in my head, it's about, let's see, 76, about 9,800 jobs in those three industries combined, directly attributable to those industries. So if carbon sources magically disappeared, we'd lose that number of jobs here in Utah. And just transition is a great way to think about. We have to support the communities and the jobs, the people that are negatively impacted by these transitions. We must do that. There's no question in my mind, right? So, yeah.
And it's also skills, we can't just have all of these lost jobs transferred into clean and renewable
Correct.
energy because it's a different skill set.
Part of the just transition is typically, at least the ones that are supported federally, include retraining people that lose jobs. So that's a good policy.
So how much do clean energy industries currently contribute to Utah's economy then?
Thom would probably have an answer at the tip of his tongue. I didn't. I'd have to go back to dig through some research or models to answer that. But, slightly less than 10,000 jobs, while it's significant, is a small fraction of Utah's workforce. So it's not a major impact on the employment side. It is a big impact for the owners of the resources, right? Those are the people that, the jobs, if we lost all of that industry, the jobs would be gone, and that we have to fix that. And it would be very damaging financially to the owners of the resources, of the coal mines and the oil wells and so forth that exist here. And, I think there are ways to do that. I think I worry less about that, frankly, than the jobs lost, because already the financing for many of these extraction industries, especially in carbon fuels, is drying up. It's starting to disappear globally, and I don't know about in Utah what the investment situation is, but the people who finance, big money who finances these kinds of projects, are beginning to recognize that there's a change coming on the horizon. They're starting to not fund these projects. I do have a number that sort of illustrates the size of the problem, though, which I'm not trying to minimize the size of this disruption in the future. There's about $25 trillion invested in carbon-related industries, extraction, refining, internal combustion cars, all of internal. So that's about 25 trillion, which globally, which is about 15% or so of all global investment. So it's a very large, substantial industry, and the immediate people who will be harmed from the transition in these investments are the owners and stockholders of the companies involved. So but again, I think they're peering over the horizon a little bit, and they know they're going to have to make a transition, hopefully.
So I think we're moving really quickly through the panel because we don't have Thom here to add all of the political color, and that would be, it's a number I don't have. It'd be a fantastic number to have because it's a number you all want to know. But what we can answer is the renewable industry in Utah pushing for development in Utah with current jobs, high-paying jobs, right? Like these are the executives coming in and moving things forward. That answer is yes. Are there planned projects that have already had groundbreakings for renewable development in Utah? Yes, absolutely. And just like any resource, right, Utah, I'm sure you've heard it before, Utah is solar rich. So a lot of the renewables in Utah have been focused on solar, where Wyoming is wind rich for consistency. So a lot of their renewables have been focused on wind. But the industries are here and growing at an impressive rate. So
I do have, again, these are jobs numbers from BLS, but in terms of the, let's see, electric power generation, which is the business that Lisa's company is involved in, the number of jobs in solar electric generation are about 6,400 statewide in Utah, compared to, between coal and natural gas, which are two primary electricity generators, no, about a little over 3,000. So it's over double already for solar here in Utah in terms of number of jobs. So I don't, it's hard to correlate that directly to the overall economic impacts on the state of Utah, but it's going to be roughly proportional. So yes, so solar is big and growing, and will have I think, a very important impact going forward, economically.
Oh, great. Well, I've gone through all of my questions, so if you guys have anything else you'd like to just touch base on or chip in, by all means.
Oh,
okay, I'd love to hear from the audience.
Yeah.
There.
well, I do have one more graph since we got a couple of minutes.
You're such a professor.
And this one I don't have up, but I'll just sort of wave it. Because part of my research is looking at what's called carbon intensity of the entire energy sources, all the stuff including all the renewables. And if Utah is making any progress, then that's the one number that's going to actually show it for the entire state. And there is some progress. So this is actually a forecast based on the actual data going back to, I think, 1980. I didn't pull that graph. And this shows, well, it's a nice downward sloping graph. It's a little bit misleading. It looks like, I don't know if you're able to see that. Can you actually see the line on that? Yeah. It looks like it's a nice decrease, but the scale effects, meaning, the scale on the y-axis is a bit misleading. It's not as big a percentage decrease, but it's in the right direction. And this is the impact of, however we're doing it, cleaning up our energy sources. There's some things you can do to clean carbon, not a lot, frankly, that have been economically feasible. But this is mainly, I think, the impact of the renewables that are already deployed in Utah to generate energy. So, and I do want to emphasize the important role that Lisa's company, Rocky Mountain Power, plays in this transition that we have to go through if we're going to maintain sustainable future from a climate standpoint. And that is the transition of transport to electricity. There is almost no reason, none, except capacity, generating capacity, not to heavily subsidize transition away from internal combustion engines for virtually all of the transportation fleet, automobiles for sure. I think most commercial vehicles, trucks and so forth can make that transition, and it's financially feasible. It pays back over, it's a good investment essentially. And that's one of the things I think the state should absolutely subsidize. I don't know if it's in any of the stuff you mentioned.
Yeah, if we want to talk about electric vehicles, that's amazing. So we just revamped our electric vehicle incentive program. And now we're looking at different buckets of money. Rocky Mountain Power wants to develop electric service stations, essentially. You probably wouldn't think of them as you would think a typical service station, right?
Like
the centralized
like a Tesla
charging
supercharger.
areas.
Right.
And then we also have a large amount of money for make-ready infrastructure grants, which is one of the barriers, which probably gets way too into the weeds of the technical of how we do things. But there's one thing to want to put chargers in your parking lot as a business. And there's another thing of getting the power to those chargers. That has a huge amount of expense. That has been a big barrier. So our new electric vehicle incentive program helps reduce that barrier by now starting to cover some of the cost of those infrastructure upgrades that are required to even be able to put a charger in place. And then the remaining incentives for vehicle chargers are still there. Level 2 will have some of the fast charge Tesla work. And then we just have more and more conversations every day on much larger scale, autonomous delivery trucks, how this could all work within Utah. And it's exciting because on a personal level, if I never had to go to a gas station again in my entire life, I would be psyched. Like that transition away from that, I think for each of us individually, is a life changer. I've got a little electric vehicle that charges at home, and that's been fantastic. We fully support it. We're doing everything we can to reduce the barriers. And when I worked for Mary Anderson, way back 2 decades ago almost, I had to call and get like, where does our pollution come from in the Salt Lake Valley? And back then it was 60% mobile sources. And that number has stayed basically true. It's not the mobile sources. The mobile sources are moving away from it. We have a very stable, reliable electric grid that is adding renewables as the generation resource. It is still our personal vehicles. It's still the delivery trucks. It's still moving goods. So all of that needs to transition, and we're doing what we can to support it.
So if I could add to that, I think these are exactly the kind of projects that should be heavily, I know you don't like the word subsidized, it is a legal economic term, so, okay. So any economic students will recognize it immediately. Whatever kind of credits or whatever. What subsidized means some government somewhere funds these kinds of projects, or it helps in funding them by making, transfers of money. So those are called subsidies. These should be heavily subsidized. These are the kinds of subsidies, the investments that we need to get rid of the inversion problem we have here in this valley. And by the way, since the sources of the inversion and global warming are essentially exactly the same, we contribute to fixing global warming by cleaning up, our local sources. By electrifying the fleet, I think it's such a clear-cut win. So that the state supporting that to the degree it can, along with federal subsidies, I think is extremely important.
All right, should we move to questions from the audience? Well, I could chip in just a little bit here. I don't know if you've heard of thorium, but it's a new chemical they're using in nuclear reactors that's way more sustainable.
That's a fission, though, right?
Oh, well, a fission. I don't know my, wording and everything, but I have a great TED Talk for you if you want to watch that. Yeah. But overall, I feel like they're trying to advance nuclear energy and try to make it safer.
So I know a bit about nuclear fusion. I follow it as part of my, overall research. And in particular, I'm going to make a distinction here. And Marshall isn't in the room to giggle, so I can go ahead. Hot fusion is what you're referring to, which is the attempt to recreate what the solar physicists, mainstream solar physicists, believe are the reactions on the sun, our sun and every sun, to create the heat and light that we see from the sun, the sunlight essentially. And that's been an ongoing science project and engineering project for many decades now, at least 4, maybe longer, at scale, decades, with the investment of tens of billions, probably in close to the hundreds of billions of dollars worldwide in the basic research and in the engineering, building the projects like the ITER in Europe and tokamak and so forth, various large hot fusion. And while there was, I'm very familiar with the recent report that you referenced, and the key point is they've been spending 40 years trying to get to a number that's greater than what we call coefficient performance, which is output over input, greater than 1. The one you referred to was about 0.3, and it was for 5 seconds. That's a long way. It's a step, but it's a very long way from being anywhere near commercially feasible. And even I think the most optimistic estimates are we're 20 or 30 years still, as always, away from having commercially feasible fusion. I happen to believe, I think there are science reasons for that. I think, frankly, and this is not the topic here, but the solar physics science should be modified. It's not correct. So the reactions that actually go on in all suns are different than the ones that mainstream solar physics say go on, and there's mounting evidence to support my point of view. If that's the case, they're chasing the wrong science, very difficult science. It's feasible, but who knows when and at what cost? It'll be extremely expensive. So I don't believe in a future that relies on the current hot fusion technologies. I just don't think it's going to happen anytime soon enough to fix the problem. There are other kinds of fusion that we can talk about, but that's not the topic here. So.
So what is the big holdup on making the switch over for the subsidies? Like, is there a legislature? Are we electing the wrong people? Are we not making a big enough deal about this? What's the holdup?
I don't know if you're comfortable in answering that. Are you?
I don't think it's a discomfort. I'm not sure I know what the answer is, right? Like, yes, it's politics, right? Then there's other challenges. There's coming out of this pandemic and the supply chain challenges we're having. Projects are slowing down, potentially. But that doesn't get to your larger question. And
well, I'm just like curious, like, are they all shareholders in this kind of business, and so they don't want it to go away, or what?
I mean, it's interesting because as the power company, there's definitely that public perception that we've been clinging to these old technologies because we love them, right? And that's really, it's a business, and it's a regulated business that's been told to provide the lowest cost power so that people have access to it. So we run an integrated resource plan, and all of the resources compete against each other basically on cost, and those resources have traditionally been the most affordable. It's not, there's no emotional attachment to it, it's just, that's what the fleet is, and that's how it's continued to work. So certainly that the economics slow down the movement towards renewables. And all of that is shifting. And then, I mean, in terms of climate change, right? Like, are we shifting fast enough? And where is the political will to say we aren't, right? Where right now, I think the political will is, yeah, we're shifting fast enough because it's all market driven. Where's the political will to say we aren't? And if the science says we aren't, and if the students say we aren't, then that needs to continue to move and push the change forward. Because right now, the policies that will do that haven't been written, haven't been thought of, haven't been presented. But yes, it's something we need to not lose focus on.
Yeah, let me, if I may add to that, which I agree with. The people that would be most damaged by a quicker transition are the ones that essentially own those resources. And so they're companies and individuals that own, you know, the oil wells and the coal mines and so forth, and the processing, you know, the refining and oil or gasoline distribution. And they are very wealthy and very politically active. So they have a very high leverage on the political system, not just in Utah. It's pretty much everywhere. And that's why, frankly, after I finally began to really digest the impact of what my research shows, and I showed you the carbon dioxide graph briefly for Utah, it went out to 2065. It looks very similar for the US, for the world, right? So Utah is not, you know, it's not, you know, a villain here by any stretch. The implications, however, are that by the end of this century, roughly, this is very rough, the world will put an additional 30 or 35% of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere from burning carbon fuels than has been put into the atmosphere. So these are so-called anthropogenic, right, human-caused carbon dioxide emissions, than have been put there since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And the temperature implications of that are a high 3 or a low 4 degrees centigrade increase in global temperatures, which we're going to share with the world here in Utah. So that's where both my science, my research, and the governmental panels, the IPCC, for those of you familiar with the UN organization that studies this a lot, you know, I'm pretty much in alignment with their total outcomes. And that's not going to be acceptable to a large chunk of global population. It's going to cause huge pain and change in lifestyles, huge migration problems in the world. And that's why I feel so, what led me to looking at these other future technological solutions. Because there is not anything on the horizon that says we're going to fix it with the current set of technology. And if not, then you have to look further. And when I saw the number, it's not my number, it's, you know, it's I think a very well-researched number of potential 600 times cost differential between anything we have now and these future technologies. As an economist, I know that's going to force change. People will just change overnight, relatively overnight. And I'll ask you again, if I came to you and offered you that source generation, would we talk?
Yeah, absolutely.
You bet. Absolutely. So that's where we're not solving the problem now on the track we're on, no matter how much hard work we all put in, including myself on the whole renewable fleet. So we got to look beyond it. Actually, Utah has a history of doing that. It's not, it's sort of been buried, but it may be revivable. But I'm going to, you know, that's what I work on. That's what I work on in my non-day jobs. Yeah.
My question sort of touches on what Professor Bannister just talked about. With the speed that we're working at, to switch to renewable and clean energy sources, do you think it's too late to reverse the effects of climate change?
Well, reverse is a big challenge, right? It is, and mainly because carbon dioxide that's emitted into the atmosphere has a very long half-life of, you know, I don't know, 50 or 100 years, depending on who you believe. So everything that's already there is contributing, and to reverse the climate change, that source of the climate change, you have to remove the carbon dioxide, get rid of it. And the technologies for doing that are, I think, pretty unfeasible and very expensive. Carbon capture and sequestration, all that. It's just probably not going to happen. It's not cost competitive. So my big emphasis is let's get technologies, fund the research in the technologies that I alluded to that would cost, just sheer cost differentials, price differentials. You know, one electron generated by coal versus one electron generated by the technologies I'm referring to, no one, the end user doesn't care where the electron came from. An electron is an electron. There's no quality difference in electrons. They're all the same. So it's really just the cost that drives this whole decision. So if we can get really, really, really cheap, clean energy, 600, say 600, then it'll drive out, I think, I mean, I've done some estimates of this. It's hard, you know, there are historical precedents, but say in a decade, you would have a major transition. What we can do, what I can point to as a source, I think, of real hope is that recently revived piece of research says that if we dropped carbon to zero, carbon sources to zero, stop combusting carbon for energy today, that within 4 to 5 years, period of 4 to 5 years, the increase in global warming would stop. It would be halted. So that's the most comfortable thing I can say about the benefits, the real benefits to global climate change, if we can engineer this change to the advanced technologies that I spend a lot of time on. Hope that helps.
Yeah, and I opened it up to the rest of you as well on the panel. What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you. Probably covered it reasonably
Okay.
well. Anna, do you have?
No, I think you covered it
Okay.
pretty well.
So much. I think we do have time for one more question. So if there's no more from the audience, I have one. You know, Lisa, this is actually for you. You say you worked in government, working for Mayor Anderson in the past. In your current role at Rocky Mountain Power, do you or do any of your team members work with local, state government officials? And if so, I'm curious what those interactions are like as you administer Utah's energy needs. I'm just curious what that relationship is, both on maybe a city level, as you were working before, or at the state level.
They are varied,
Yeah.
right? Just as individual as we are, frankly. The discussions with Salt Lake City leadership, sustainability leadership at the mayoral level as well, look very different from conversations. I'm trying to think of examples I really know. Even in Park City, Summit County, but then Ivins, Utah, right? Like everywhere is very different. So House Bill 411, for those of you that don't know, the legislature enabled communities to come together and then ask Rocky Mountain Power to provide 100% net of their energy as renewable to their entire community. So not just the municipal service meters, the entire community, as an opt-out program as well. So once it rolls out, if a customer doesn't specifically say, I don't want this, I want the normal energy, then everyone in these communities will be getting 100% of renewable energy. So we're working on that. A number of the large communities, Salt Lake City was a driver of it, Summit County was a driver of it, Park City were drivers of it. And other communities, we're really still just engaged with them on a day-to-day basis of moving poles when they need to widen a roadway for safety, providing power to every developer who comes in, right? It's pretty interesting because as the power company, you know how fast Utah is growing because everyone needs a hookup. And so every single community that we serve, we see all of that growth, and that's how we engage with communities, making sure we've pulled the appropriate permits, that we're following all of the laws, and And then at that other greater political level of what do customers need, want, and how do we act as good partners to get communities towards their goals.
That is all the time that we have for questions today. Thank you everyone for joining us, and please let's give a round of applause to our panelists.
Well, it was great meeting you.
Good job. Nice meeting you as well.
Thanks. I'll need it.